I'm William Shatner. I've done a lot of things in my career, but this takes the cake. This is so cool. You, Joseph, today, it's all about you. You won the internet. Congratulations. It's exciting. It makes me want to celebrate. Makes me want to get up out of this chair. Makes me want to sing. Makes me want to dance. Makes me want to shout. Kick my heels up. Throw my hands up. Toss my head back. No, really, people should be shouting your name in the street.
Come on now, sing that name.
Sing that song.
Joseph,
Sing it out loud.
Joseph.
I want to celebrate. Put it up in lights.
The internet belongs to you.
See, no one else deserves to be celebrated like you because you are the best.
Joseph Jaffe. That's I believe that's a Japanese name. And but I tell you what, he's not famous. He's famouser than he was, or used to was. But fame is fleeting, like a paperweight. It just comes and goes.
Woody hoo! Woody hoo! Out here in the stream, as in the streaming era, I fight for my dreams. I get my heart into my living.
You encourage drinking or marijuana use on the show?
I don't need a fight, cause Evelyn's right. Or you could sponsor an emu. I'm Batman.
That's your tweetable moment, folks. That's your tweetable moment.
If Mark Zuckerberg makes a metaverse, is that Web3? No, it's Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse.
He's like us. He's flawed.
Just a little segue.
That's some dope shit, dude. That's really, really nice.
Woody hoo! Woody hoo! It is December 30th, 2025, and I am back. Where have I been? I have no idea. I've been doing real work, because this is not work. This is love. You know, some people call it labor of love. I call it love of labor. I'm so happy to be back. I'm so happy to be taking stock at this time to look back on an amazing year. You know, we always start off every single session as part of EOS with what's called good news, a positive impact spiral, this idea of always looking to celebrate something positive. And sometimes we're going through tough times. Sometimes the world is going through a VUCA time, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But, you know, if you woke up this morning, that's something to celebrate. You get another at bat. You get another opportunity to swing for the fences. But when I look at the year, some incredible conversations on the show, and today is going to be no different. Michael Green is going to be coming in and talking about how $100,000, in fact, maybe even more than 100K, is the new poverty. And he's got the receipts. To prove it as well. Also amazing to look at Jim Meskimen doing his impressions in the opening credits. I've been watching Landman, Billy Bob Thornton on Paramount Plus. I shouldn't be giving Paramount Plus any additional props, I suppose, these days. But I saw him on the show, and I was like, hey, he was on my show before he was famous. Maybe he was famous before, but maybe he became famous from being on my show. I have no idea. But what I do know is that it is really, really good to be back. It is good to start off every show with my why statement, really just talking about this idea of getting unstuck, returning to growth, and becoming forever change. When I started the show, it was designed to help people that were stuck at home, quite literally, or stuck in general. And the show was about hope, positivity, and optimism. And if there was time left over, a little bit of marketing. Now I work with leadership teams to help them grow, to return to growth. But what I always talk about is growth is not always just about market share and EBITDA and top and bottom line. Sometimes growing is about growing up. And I think today's conversation is a grown up conversation about growing up, about prioritization, which is why I wrote my 6th book. I was thinking, was it 5th or 7th? 6th, called Forever Changed: How a Global Pandemic Changed My Direction, My Purpose, and My Life. And it was really just, I reinvented myself during this whole time, just because it was time to reprioritize. But now it's time for the seated soliloquy. And today, the seated soliloquy, I've got to figure out, I'm playing around now with, I have my mixing board, but I also have enhanced features on my little StreamYard. So there you go. I'm actually doing this from StreamYard. My seated soliloquy is called Enough. Now, for those of you that don't know, that's the title of my next book. They say writing a book is like childbirth, although I wouldn't know. But apparently it is painful. So much so that you always say, I'm never going to do it again until you do it again. But I feel like I need to write this book. The book is called Enough: The Search for Happiness in the Post-Capitalist Era. And I know Michael has some thoughts on post-capitalism. We may or may not get to it. I think we will get to it. But, you know, I was frustrated. I was impatient. I felt like it was time to talk about the fact that the business model of business is broken. That's what I wrote about in Built to Suck. And then I said the business model of life is broken in Forever Changed, which is we hoard titles and awards and trophies and money for what? So that we can leave it to a bunch of ungrateful children or maybe a cat. As I wrote about in Forever Changed, in a perfect world, we would die with $1 to our name, because that would represent a life well loved and a life well lived. And so for me, this is the battle right now. The battle is, what is the ceiling? You know, when do you get to a point where you can actually say, I've arrived, I've made it, it's time to focus on, I don't know, leaving a legacy, making a difference, actualizing yourself. But what Michael has done, and he's going to be on shortly, is really talking about, which I think is so brilliant, about the floor. What is the minimum requirement? What is sufficiency? I always heard that word back when I was in the marketing world, sufficiency. What is the minimum number of impressions? It was generally used in connection with what is the minimum amount of investment or activity or media impressions to get on someone's radar, to get their attention. Efficiency is a very important word, and it's a word that we need to start thinking about. Today, you know, there are some data points that I think are going to rock your world, because it certainly rocked mine. And the rock star is Michael Green. Michael Green is a portfolio manager and chief strategist at Simplify Asset Management, a student of markets for 30 years. His research on the shift from active management to passive strategies has been presented to the Federal Reserve, BIS, and the IMF. He joined Simplify in April 2021 after serving as chief strategist and portfolio manager at Logica Capital Advisors. Earlier, he managed macro strategies at Steel Macro and founded Ice Farm Capital, a discretionary macro hedge fund seeded by Soros Fund Management. From 2006 to 2014, he built Canyon Capital Advisors macro business. He's a Wharton graduate and so impressive that I think I might ask him for a loan. Michael, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. The music is fading away in the background now. Thank you for having me, Joseph. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, I mean, as Mike Tyson would say, fading into Bolivian. So there you go. Yes. Consider it done. You know, that's a pretty impressive resume or 100-word bio, thanks to ChatGPT. But, you know, seriously, can I get a loan? Is that... are you the right person, or am I barking up the wrong tree?
I'm not the right person to give a personal loan, and I always remember the line from Benjamin Franklin: "Neither a borrower nor a lender be." So the simple reality is, if you wanted to come to me and talk about corporate financing, I could help you out. On a personal basis, it's probably not the right fit.
All right. Well, I honestly don't. This is not my world. I'm a marketer, and I always would joke that I only know how to spend the money. I don't know how to earn it. I don't know how to save it. I don't know how to account for it. I'm from the creative world, and of course, they say whenever you mix money and creativity, somebody goes to jail. So I'm going to stay away from that. Maybe you'll teach me a thing or two, but we'll start off with the creative side of it, a little bit of fun from the. I said from the sublime to the ridiculous. So why not start with the ridiculous, which is we sent our investigators into the field to find out a little bit about you, some deep, dark secrets. You turned out somewhat squeaky clean, but we did find out these 3 little data points about you. First of all, you have size 15 feet. So that must make you. What does that make you? Does it make you a giant? Are you a giant of industry?
I am tall. I'm significantly taller than average, although less tall than I used to be. Yeah, I do have size 15 feet. I'm about 6'3".
6'3", 15 feet, and I love to sometimes I look at these 3 fun facts that I ask my guests. Yes, let's break the 5th wall. There are no private investigators on this budget. Why do you volunteer the fact that you have size 15 feet? I'm just intrigued by why that's one of your 3 fun facts.
1, why not? But 2, you're always looking for outliers. So I think it was actually framed to me in the context of things that would be presented as, 2 lies and the truth sort of thing. Size 15 feet are relatively unusual. In today's world, it means something very different. When I was growing up, getting shoes at size 15 was incredibly challenging. I sometimes tell this story. I was a lacrosse player in high school, and in order to get cleats, I had to go to the San Francisco 49ers. They were the only place that you could actually buy cleats in that size, or that you could obtain cleats easily in that size, is to go to a professional or an NCAA college program where they get them special ordered. You couldn't buy them at Foot Locker. They topped out at size 12 or size 13.
So, there always is a method to the madness. And the real reason why I did this, in fact, I clean forgot about the 2 truths and a lie. So just for the record, all 3 fun facts you sent are truth, or there is a lie in there?
I believe all of them were true. I honestly don't remember. You to show me the other 2, but I believe my understanding was you would come up with 2 lies and the truth.
I did, and I completely forgot to do that. But what I like about it as well is
I think that's a lie. You're probably just acknowledging that you were a little lazy in preparation for this interview. I'm teasing you, obviously, but
yeah, that's not a lie. That's very truthful as well. But I'll tell you, the real thinking behind it actually is the whole the David Brooks idea of resume versus eulogy virtues. Like, really get to know the man, the woman, the person. And what's interesting about it is this made you different, right? You were different. You stood out. You have a story to tell all these years. And this is just call it a physical enhancement, because you probably can run faster than other people, I guess, with the big shoes, or you'd be a good candidate for the circus. But it separates you. And our kids today, they don't want to stand out. They don't want to separate. They just want to be vanilla. They just want to blend in the social media world, as opposed to being able to say, here's something about me and it makes me different, it makes me unique, it makes me special.
I think there's a little bit of truth to that, but so 2 quick things. One, I used to joke that the size of my feet was relevant because it gave me deep understanding. The second thing, in terms of kids, I agree with you. Like, the single most inflammatory thing my kids can say to me is, "Oh, I couldn't do that. That would be weird." Right. And that manifests itself in the younger generation being uncomfortable calling people. It manifests in them being unwilling to introduce themselves or to speak clearly in a situation in which they're in public. I was fortunate in that I saw that, caught it in my kids, and managed to emphasize that they wouldn't behave that way, and so they've all ended up doing relatively well on that spectrum. But I agree with you that there is an element of conformity, that people are scared to stand out in the world of social media because who knows where it could be represented again.
I had someone on my show a couple of years ago, actually, where we really focused on the word weird. And when you look at the dictionary definition, it's one of the most magnificent definitions, because it talks about out of this world. It even talks about somewhat, there's an extraterrestrial nature to it, but it talks about being exceptional, different in a good way, as opposed to different in a bad way. So, as I said, we end up with these interesting different conversations, from fun facts like I don't know, like this one, which is you and McDonald's, right? Your first W-2 job was at McDonald's, when I punched you and McDonald's into one of my AI tools, it actually had you as like Ray Kroc running and owning the McDonald's. And I said, no, we're not talking about owning the McDonald's. We're talking about working, I don't know, at the fry machine.
That is where you start, is at the fry machine, which basically involves pressing two buttons. You then move on to the grill, which is dangerous and the potential for significant accidents. And then if you're really, really special, they'll put you up front and you can deal with the customers, which was always my favorite part of it.
It's funny, going back to our kids, or kids in a way. One of the things that we do with our leadership teams is we do something called personal histories, and we do it at the end of the year. It's part of Trust Builders, and we ask them 6 questions like, what's your hometown? How many siblings do you have? What was your first job? What was your worst job? And thankfully, none of them have ever said that their worst job is the current job that they're in, because that would be awkward. But it's the first job, Michael, and again, I feel like so many of this next generation are not going through, the paper route. A lot of those typical first jobs that so many of us had in our generation, or even a generation before, which is a shame.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. First, to be clear, it was my first W-2 job. So my first job was actually when I was 4 years old. I grew up on a small farm, and my responsibility was actually collecting eggs to sell to the neighbors. My second job was actually at a pizza place when I was 12. It was basically next to the ballet school that my sister went to, and my parents both worked. There was no capacity for childcare, so my childcare basically consisted of hanging out at the Round Table Pizza joint next door. And eventually the owner was like, hey, instead of you just sitting here, why don't you work for me? And ended up doing that, and it was a blast. I actually had a fantastic time. And it really taught me, among other things, it taught me to deal with people, to look customers in the eye, to address, problems that were occurring, or present a business positively. It also taught me, candidly, a lot of empathy for people that were not 12 years old working in that situation. They as individuals were certainly deserving of more respect, I think, than I probably would have initially assumed until I began to work with them.
This has been parenting advice with Michael Green and Joseph Jaffe. But and of course, your final fun fact, which, speaking about eggs, is that you grew up on a farm. So forget about old McDonald, old McGreen.
Old McGreen, yeah. No, I am actually quite impressed that the AI makes me significantly better looking than I actually am, with a much better head of hair, and but it does pick up on the striped shirt. That plays to crowd.
I have a standing line, by the way, which is what I've found, because I found it with me, is that AI cannot sort out ugly. So you therefore are not ugly. But with me, the only prompt that works for me is do this and make me look like a model, because otherwise, I don't know, maybe I just don't see how ugly I really am, face for radio. But you're okay, Michael. You made it.
Well, not yet famous, but thank you. I appreciate it.
All right.
I
Yeah.
did actually want to address something that you said about the younger generation not working, and I think we have to be very, very careful on that, because in all candor, the younger generation not only works extraordinarily hard, but they've been set a expectation for a degree of success that basically they have to do everything perfectly in order to hit all the steps that we have laid out for them in society, right? They're so busy playing club sports so that they can obtain, they can get the interest of college coaches. They're so busy getting perfect grades. They're so busy doing their test prep, or at least that used to be. It changed a little bit with COVID and some of the changes around university admissions, that honestly, I think they're working much harder than we ever did. There's much less unstructured time. There's much less time for self-exploration. And what little time there is, they spend it basically catching up on social media. So there's just, I think one of the challenges is that we've actually improperly directed the younger generation as compared to them not working hard. I think they're working their butts off. And candidly, by the time they get to college graduation, they're likely exhausted.
I think that's a great point, actually, and so they're working, but perhaps it's not a prioritization point, right? It's to what end? It's to be able to get into the school. It's in order to, but even that in of itself is it based on what they truly want or what everyone else wants for them? And it's not just their parents; it's society. It's what is considered to be the norm or the standard. We're going to talk about this in a moment. We're going to talk about what college used to be, what college is. Where, I mean, some of the data points in your article were just insane, in terms of like what you needed to do or to earn in order to get through college or get someone through college. And now we got to look at just college itself and go, why is it still worth it? So I don't know if you want to go there straight away, but I mean, well, let's do that. Actually, let's talk about how I found you, or found out about you, watching Smerconish on CNN. I'm just going to immediately ask you the question, which is, why the hell did he not have you on the show? When he's citing this article of yours, I have to ask you that. Why didn't he have you on the show? You're the author of the article.
The quick answer is that I don't know, but I actually was interviewed by CNN, so maybe I'm just not handsome enough to put on the screen. The quick response to that is, candidly, it's time consuming to interview somebody, and it's an unknown, outcome. And so I could have, I could be a terrible guest. Who knows? You may find that out. But the simple reality is that a lot of people found this piece. It was never intended to go viral. I think that's one of the things that is really, really critical here to understand is that this is part of my Substack. As you can see at the top, it's called Yes, I Give a Fig, Thoughts About Markets. So it's relatively unusual for me to focus on a social aspect like this. And you can see that there's a lot of, there's a lot that is ultimately written about markets in my materials. Speaks to some of the questions you were raising about, can finance or can money be creative? Do you have to go to jail for doing it, et cetera? I actually am an enthusiastic participant in financial markets, an enthusiastic theorist of why we participate in financial markets, and candidly could, spend days and days and days in somewhat nonstop monologue about why they're incredibly powerful, why they work, why they're important to us, and how we're screwing them up. So, there is a lot of stuff that is there that is not meant to go public. This piece did. And I think the reason why it did is, unfortunately, I was probably drawn to it by virtue of other conversations that I slowly began to participate in that were really focused on, well, if this system, Mike, that you think is so great and is so wonderful, why is it leading us in the wrong direction? Why are we encountering conversations around post-capitalism and a general dissatisfaction with what we're experiencing in a supposedly capitalist environment. And the answer to that is really straightforward. The capitalism is not actually anything other than an information exchange mechanism. In capitalism, we use money to signal our wants, because we signal our consumption desires. I want a green car more than I want a red car, and I'm going to buy the green car with greater frequency. That leads to an increase in production of green cars because manufacturers have an incentive to quickly clear units off of their lots to enhance their return on capital. It's a mechanism of conveying wants and desires that has no real equal.
All right, so let's. I'm glad we're talking about capitalism. I started with a provocation, actually thinking about enough. I spoke about the post-capitalist era. I also have heard the phrase late stage capitalism. In order to consider context, because it's always about context, facilitate, conclude. In terms of a discussion, we just have to look back in time and realize, well, wait a second, capitalism hasn't been around since the beginning of time, and there have been a series of phases or moments or periods of time when an ism, governed society, governed the world, governed not even so much enterprise, because free enterprise became a hallmark of capitalism, and in order to even ask the question, is it time for something else? Does it need to evolve? You've set it up. I mean, let's talk about your setup. Let's talk about poverty. Let's talk about this provocation that actually says, wait a second, there is a new poverty line, and it's a lot higher than you think. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? I mean, I'm going to put this up, which is the U.S. poverty line is calculated as 3 times the cost of a minimum food diet in 1963, adjusted for inflation. So I'll put that out there and let you talk to that and kind of build around it.
Sure. So that's an accurate description. In 1963, and trying to evaluate what could be used as a measure for identifying families in crisis. The Department of, I believe it was Social Security, an individual named Molly Morshansky, who was an economist, recognized that the average household spent approximately 1/3 of their budget on food. And as a result, if you use the USDA minimum food budget, you tripled that, you could come to an understanding of what level was clearly not enough, a level at which a family was in immediate crisis. They then took that number, officially designated it in 1969, and began adjusting it by CPI, the BLS calculation for what the cost of living is in the United States, with a variety of modifiers to it, to try to maintain that going forward. Now, part of what's interesting is, as early as 1966, the same economists and others were recognizing that the poverty line was no longer fulfilling its initial purpose, that it no longer was representative, but it became politically convenient as a demarcation point to establish where benefits would be provided to families in crisis. And so relitigating it, going through the process of trying to understand it more deeply, was largely set aside in favor of political expediency. The challenge is today that food at home, that minimum food budget, would translate to between 5 and 7% of the average family's expenditure. And the reason why that line no longer works is that by simply tripling effectively the food budget, which is really what you've continued to do when you adjust it by CPI, because food has largely followed the CPI budget, you're failing to account for all the other things that are now necessary for participation in real life. Really simple examples of that would be something like a cell phone versus a landline. In the 1950s and 1960s, as a household, you needed a single landline that you could lease from AT&T, the sole provider. about $5 a month. If you didn't have access to it, by the way, there was likely a neighbor next door that could take a phone call for you and tell you that somebody was calling, and you could figure out how to move from there. So sometimes wasn't even necessary to truly have the landline. Today, you have cell phones, and those cell phones are so incredibly personalized that they're required, by and large, to access bank accounts. They're required in many situations to access your children's school portal so that you can become an informed parent in the process of educating your child. A landline, inflation adjusted, works out to about $56 a month. Find me a smartphone plan that you can get for $56 a month, particularly when you consider that the line that I was analyzing was a family with 2 income earners and 2 children. In almost all situations, every member of that family is going to need to have access to a personalized computing device that requires cellular or radio connections. And that's going to end up costing you somewhere between $150 and $200 a month, roughly 3 times the level that the CPI adjustment would suggest. Now, it is absolutely true that phone also now functions as an entertainment device. That phone functions as a study aid. It does many things that the traditional landline didn't do. But it's still a requirement for participation in the same way that that landline would have been a requirement in 1963. And so to fail to capture the increase in services that are required naturally lends you to a position in which you undercalculate the level at which people need to have income to participate in today's society.
I'm so glad that you actually gave the example of a landline versus a cell phone, right? And today, it's not a cell phone; it's a smartphone, and multiplied by a family. But you actually provide some more. I don't want to even say more substantial, but more significant examples of how this multiplier has changed to what, and I guess we'll get to what the calculation is, from 3 to 16. And you talk about housing, you talk about actually the number one contributor, or at least modifier, which is childcare.
Yep.
So housing, healthcare, childcare, cars, and of course college tuition. And it is significant, the changes in all of those, before you even get to something like a landline and cutting the cord and cable. And I would just preempt what you're about to say is, when you went and did your calculations and checked, and you actually got to the same place, you were talking about existing without taking a vacation, without Netflix, without many things that so many people take for granted in the greatest country, in the world.
Yeah, I think unfortunately that's correct, right? And we all know that TVs and smartphones, and in many ways cars, et cetera, have become dramatically better and dramatically less intensive for people to work and obtain those things. But on the flip side of it, services like childcare have emerged that simply didn't exist in a meaningful capacity in the 1960s. You had neighbors that were staying home that could watch your kids if you needed to do a quick errand. The odds were very high that you, as a mother in a married family with 2 children, would be staying at home. By the way, I want to be very, very clear. Like, the opportunity for women to participate across our society is an unquestioned good. The opportunity to do so is an unquestioned good that gives you additional freedom. The obligation to do so in order to participate does not represent freedom. And so there is a distinct difference between the two. Nobody would be more enthusiastic about supporting women's rights to work and engage in various forms of limiting their capacity for unexpected pregnancies, et cetera, prophylactics, et cetera, birth control being widely distributed. These all facilitate choice. It's a question of, are you forced into those choices or not, that really determines whether you are at a point where you have individual freedom. And your focus on happiness, I think, is a really interesting one. I'm sure it was not totally unintentional that you're referencing Thomas Jefferson, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. It's one of the reasons that term has become so important in our daily lives as Americans, is its presence in the Declaration of Independence. But I think one of the things that's really missing in that is understanding what Jefferson meant by happiness. He didn't mean a chemically induced Prozac happiness. What he meant was life's purpose, right? The Greek term eudaimonia, which is really expressing what you would like to achieve in your life, is what he was referencing. And so when you think about happiness in that context, it absolutely is not one of continually being forced into a series of brutal choices. Do I substitute work for childcare? Do I choose choose to go without access to these things? Do I put my children into a situation in which they will be unable to flourish in a forward-looking society because I selfishly want to have children, right? I don't think there's, I want to celebrate people having children, but we have to acknowledge that the cost basket associated with having children in today's world has become prohibitively high, to the point that more and more people are pushing off those decisions to the point where it becomes a very finite range of possibilities, right? It's important to recognize that time itself is the most valuable commodity. And if you are not capable of forming a family between the ages of roughly 25 and about 40, the odds that you are going to have children and have that life that your parents had before you, it doesn't matter the reasons behind it. It doesn't matter whether the government declares it at X line or Y line. The simple reality is you're being forced to make life choices in a time period in which, if you come out the other side of it without having made those successful choices, that opportunity is largely gone.
I'm going to give you the first official air horn, which is wow. I mean, you said a lot. You threw down a couple of gauntlets, and the first thing that I took away from that is I was thinking, right, the be careful what you wish for, but this idea that says, hey, you know, everyone should be able to go out and actualize themselves and earn a living, etc. But there's this vicious cycle. I have to go out. We have to be a double income earning family in order to make ends meet. But by doing that, the cost, the cost of the ante up to be an active participant almost cancels out the actual contribution coming from that, from that job, especially like talking about something like childcare. It's depressing. It's absolutely depressing listening to you and thinking, like, where do you turn to? And what a luxury it is, Michael. I mean, if I had to ask you, do you love what you do? Do you love your job? Do you love going to work? What a luxury to actually be able to earn a living and actually enjoy it at the same time.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, this is one of the things that I constantly remind people that, I am incredibly fortunate. I, exist in a world in which my primary contribution is to look at puzzles and try to solve them. And you mentioned, the question of like, how did I get here? What was the path, et cetera? What do I do in my daily life? Within financial markets, I'm, known for the work that I do in derivatives, which take on a very special significance. First of all, almost all financial instruments are forms of derivatives. But more importantly, derivatives actually reward challenging assumptions around what are the possible outcomes, considering the range of possible outcomes of things that can occur over a specified period of time. They provide you with real leverage against that. And the trades in my career that have been very successful have largely involved figuring out whether there's a mistake in the assumptions around the distribution and building trades to capitalize on, whether that's the housing collapse in 2006, 2007 that morphed into the global financial crisis of 2008, or the XIV trades around what was called the Volmageddon events. These are areas that are fascinating to me and incredibly interesting to understand kind of like what are the assumptions that underpin how a system is supposed to work, and what is the reality of the simplifying assumptions that we've made within those models, right? Because models are simply representations of the real world that open up opportunities for extraordinary profit around it.
So let's go back to the math for a second. You
Yep.
go out there and you come up with the assertion that actually, and I want to make sure I get this right, that the real poverty line, or at least the real amount that a household needs to be able to make ends meet, to meet the bare minimum, is a whopping, and I mean a whopping, $140,000. That blows my mind. And here's the math.
Well, it blew my mind candidly as well, right? Again, I was very fortunate. My wife stayed home. We did incur childcare expenses. We had 3 children growing up in New York City. I will tell you that 140,000 or a required net income of 118 prior to taxes, after taxes, doesn't even come remotely close to that number within New York City. But when you look through the math and you recognize that on a national average basis, the cost of childcare is between $25,000 and $35,000 for 2 children. The cost of food is now around $14,000. Transportation, when you factor in automobiles, the requirement, and this is, one of the pushbacks from critics, they'll say, well, those numbers are way too high, your transportation costs. Well, the simple reality is a family with 2 income earners and 2 children almost certainly needs 2 cars. They have to have insurance. That was not something that you had to have in the 1960s. You cannot substitute an old beater car because it's not going to pass inspection. And if you can't pass inspection and you don't have anti-lock brakes and you don't have airbags, it's almost impossible to get that car insured, right? If you try to put bias ply tires on it, if you could even find them, or put regular gasoline into the car engine, you're highly unlikely to be able to do so. And so this idea that somehow or another you could still live as if you were in the 1950s or 1960s if you just set your mind to it is patently false. And the reality is these are the costs that people are incurring.
So obviously one of the arguments is, well, hey, Michael, you don't, the rest of the world or the rest of the US doesn't just live in LA and New York. There are these flyover states. Let's talk about Peoria,
Joseph, you totally froze on my side.
Am I back?
There you go. Okay. I'm sorry. So one of the arguments is,
yeah, I was saying one of the arguments is, what about those flyover states, right? What about Peoria? What about middle America? Surely the cost of living is significantly less, and you don't need that adjusted 140,000 gross, gross household income in order to make ends meet.
So first of all, I think that's very true. And I think that's one of the important things to understand is that poverty line is actually set on a nationwide basis. So it's the same for New York City as it is for California, as it is for the flyover states. The second component is, even if you do the analysis, though, in the flyover states, what you will find is that number is roughly triple the level of the official poverty line. That really creates what's the core of the article, what I referred to as the valley of death or the benefits cliff. The primary role of the poverty line is to determine the level at which the government starts withdrawing subsidies. So if you're making $31,200, there is actually, I think it's actually $32,000 now, inflation adjusted. There is a concept of what's called the supplemental poverty measure. And this actually tries to take into account the income that is received in the form of benefits, whether that's subsidized housing or subsidized childcare or subsidized insurance. These are all areas that fall into the category of the supplemental poverty measure that attempts to capture the value of those benefits. But the real trick is, as you start making more money, those benefits are withdrawn alongside the need to replace them with cash expenditures. That creates an environment in which Once you make $32,000 and exceed it, let's say get to 40,000, suddenly you start losing food subsidies. You didn't stop eating, you just stopped receiving the income associated with being very poor according to the government, and you've removed those food subsidies. Now you need to replace those subsidies with cash outlays. You get to 50,000, you start to withdraw housing, and I'm being rough on the numbers here just to be clear. You start to withdraw housing subsidies. Well, it doesn't mean you no longer need a place to live. It means you now need to actually replace those subsidies with cash outlays. And so roughly between about 40,000 and about 100,000, there's what I describe as the valley of death, or others describe as benefit cliffs. That means you have an effective marginal tax rate or inability to put any of that cash away. That means you're really not any better off between 40,000 and about 100,000 as that family. That creates disincentives. We hear about this all the time, and I've certainly seen it in many of the comments that I've received, that people who are at that level of about $40,000 will actively say, my wife can't go to work because if she did, our income would exceed these thresholds. We'd lose all the benefits associated with it. Why in the world would you construct a system that was actually designed to prevent people from putting their best efforts forward? That's the unfortunate lived reality that we have in the United States, where we are overly stingy in withdrawing those supports. My suggestion is, rather than building large state agencies or local agencies that are designed to administer these programs and make sure people do exactly what the government wants them to do, we should simply be expanding things like the earned income tax credit and provide these families with the additional cash that is necessary to get there. At the same time, when we do that, we'll be increasing the resources that are available to those families to raise and educate their children in a much more holistic framework, so that there isn't quite the same level of stress that candidly our kids look at and see with absolute fear and panic that they could end up in that level. And as a result, they work far too hard studying and sports and everything else, because they're desperately trying to hit all those goalposts that are necessary to be a realistic participant in today's world.
So you have these inconvenient truths, right? One is the fact that we're talking about $140,000 in terms of gross household income. Two, and I want people to really just grasp this statement, which is that a family earning $100,000 is effectively in a worse monthly financial position than a family earning $40,000. It is. I don't know that people can relate to it. I don't know that people actually can. I don't know that people connect with it. I actually experienced it in COVID.
Yeah.
I experienced it. I experienced having no revenue, initially when suddenly nobody was hiring keynote speakers and consultants in that first 2020 going into 2021, which, by the way, I then ended up having open heart surgery in 2021, in and out of hospital. So there you go, in terms of a healthcare bill that I'm still paying off. So I experienced going through that and realizing that, for example, thinking about college, right? And thinking about even just once you're over that $100,000 household income, enjoy writing that check for $87,000 to college. If you're not in state or in a state school or whatever the case may be, it's real. It's real.
Yeah, I think it is very, very real. And I think anyone who has experienced bouts of unemployment or taken time off, sometimes without choice, has experienced elements of that, right? The reality is that the cash outlays don't stop. I think one of the things that was most interesting to me, though, in actually going through this analysis, and it contributed to it being really kind of a 3-part series. It's available free on my Substack. One of the key recognitions was that part of what created the perplexing framework under COVID, under which many people actually experienced a higher quality of life, was that we took away a lot of the participation costs. And so when you think about, what happened during COVID, suddenly transportation needs were dramatically reduced. Suddenly you didn't need to worry about buying lunch at the office. Suddenly you didn't need to worry about childcare was the single biggest one. And so, from a economic perspective, we're often presented with the surge in savings associated with COVID as being a byproduct of government stimulus. It was nowhere near enough stimulus for that to be the case. What actually happened was that we took things like childcare and transportation costs and dining out at restaurants, and we converted them into savings. And so, there's some incremental stimulus, particularly for those at the very low end, where oftentimes the stimulus could exceed their monthly income. But for the vast majority of us, what we actually experienced during COVID was a brief snapshot of what the world would look like if we didn't have all the accoutrements associated with modern responsibilities in life. And candidly, having that taken away was a pretty big deal, right? The whole return to work was framed in the context of, well, that was a bizarre aberration and people weren't nearly as productive. But the reality was, when we all went back to work, not only did we have to reincur those costs had risen dramatically, and very few people received raises that were synonymous with that increase in expenditures that you would then have to incur. And so, this is part of the reason why we are seeing people who are deeply unhappy, according to consumer sentiment measures, even in an environment in which many try to tell us you've never had it so good.
Right. America,
et cetera.
yeah. America is not one of the happiest places in the world, not even close. We are told, kind of rejoice. The stock market is at an all-time high, and people are feeling the pain. In fact, to quote the great Michael Green, the famous Michael Green, this is it's a brilliant quote. This: "We have created a system where the only way to survive is to be destitute enough to qualify for aid, or rich enough to ignore the cost." And I'm going to add just one more inconvenient truth talking about, which is automation, AI. Hell, let's throw Doge in as well. And let's look at a world now where it is becoming increasingly hard to even earn that 140,000. So ultimately, something's going to give. Something's got to give.
Well, I think that's part of what we're going through right now is, there's a recognition that the current system is unsustainable. It's not working for the vast majority of Americans. That's coming through in expressions of support for things like My Piece. And also, candidly, the reactions to it, because you get reactions from both sides. Part of the reason that the piece went viral was a combination of it tapping into something and more, that was a genuine lived experience for many households. But much more importantly, I would actually argue, is the response on the left and the right, in which the left is understandably concerned that by lifting the poverty line to something like 140,000, we are distracting ourselves from the genuine needs and genuine concerns of those who are below that poverty line level. I think that's a very valid concern. On the right, there was an incredible mocking and attempt to fight back against the numbers and say, these are all, absurd numbers. You can't possibly do this, et cetera. Largely because they're terrified of a reintroduction of a discussion of progressivity in the tax code. And I think, unfortunately, the way My Piece should have been interpreted by the right was more of a clarion call and saying, hey, guys, whether you realize it or not, when we tell people they've never had it so good, they should be happy, even as they're not happy, we're effectively telling them, let them eat cake. And we're going to see more and more activities like the Ro Khanna-sponsored legislative activity in California that's trying to tax billionaires to pay for a continuing expense like healthcare. I mean, that is the most absurd outcome possible. The idea that you would tax a stock of wealth in order to pay for current expenditures is roughly the equivalent of saying, okay, let's actually eat our seed corn. It's just foolish.
And look, I always find a quote for my guest. This is the quote that I found for this conversation. It feels very appropriate to put it on the screen. A tomb now suffices him for whom the world was not enough. This actually is the tombstone epitaph for Alexander the Great. This was, I found this to be very apt, very apropos, right? You can't take it with you. A tomb now suffices him for whom the world was not enough. And it just makes me think of, the modern day Alexander the Great might just be Elon Musk. I don't know.
Well, so there's a couple of things I think that are actually really important there. One, I hate the term enough, right? I actually love the idea of harnessing man's capacity for greed and his desire for more. There was actually a Twitter exchange in which somebody said, what will be our role in a world in which all needs, all existing needs are met and fully automated, so nobody has to work? And my response to that was wanting more. And that is the simple reality, right? We as a species and as individuals have a natural inclination to try to improve our standard of living. That's really the unique human feature, is to modify our environment around us to improve our potential for fertility and fecundity. It's basically our genetic gift in terms of passing on our DNA, is to raise the probability that our DNA is passed forward by having more resources. So I have no issue with the idea that people want more. Another quote that I love is actually from one of the people who criticized my pieces, Noah Smith of No Opinion, who has a brilliant line, which is, why do we have billionaires? And the answer is because otherwise they'd be warlords. And he's right, right? By having the capacity to play a game that involves the accumulation of tokens that are basically future tax receipts that we call money, we distract them from the alternative, which is amassing physical power so that they can express their point of view through weapons. I would much rather live in a world in which people can play a game with tokens than to have people play games with lives. And so, that's, again, it's one of these weird things. Like, I get simultaneously claimed that I'm a socialist from the right, and classical liberal in a derogatory term from people on the left who say, well, you just don't understand, right? No, I think I've got a pretty good handle on a lot of these things. I actually think it's very important that we recognize that really what we're talking about is reestablishing the conditions under which we can, with a somewhat straight face, declare all men are created equal, right? I'm created equal. That I'm born into a wealthy family gives me access to resources that others may not have. I don't want those taken away, but I do want to recognize that there is a transfer that is actually occurring there. And that transfer should be taxed in the same way that my parents' income would be taxed if they're trying to provide those resources to me without extraordinary wealth. It's not a system that lends itself to human capital creation and a maximizing of individual production possibilities frontier, which is that intersection of capital and labor that produces the optimal outcomes. We exist in a deeply unequal and increasingly unequal society in which we've been led to believe that providing more and more resources to Elon Musk is going to have a more tangible improvement on lives than providing a more equal distribution of resources that could raise the outcomes for any number of families that are currently struggling. And I just disagree with that. There's very strong empirical, theoretical, and experimental evidence pushing in the opposite direction.
I feel like we're scratching the surface, and we may have to continue, especially over parts 2 and 3. I was looking at parts 2 and 3 as well. We've got about a minute or so left, although it is my show. I can do whatever I want.
There you go.
But I spent some time with Philip Kotler, who is just, Professor Emeritus of Marketing at Kellogg at Northwestern, one of my true role models, inspired me to become a marketer. Sat down with him. He's in his 90s, and I asked him what the solution was, and he said it's taxes. And I think you kind of said the same thing. I have to ask, right? I mean, we have Andrew Wang talks about universal basic income. What is the answer that does not lead to some kind of revolt in the streets? Is there an answer? Is there a happy ending here?
I think there is, and it's part of my frustration, right? So first of all, understand that the vast majority of what you are hearing is always going to be presented to you. As a marketer, you're intuitively aware of this, that by the time it makes it to the front page or the opinion page of a newspaper, it's been through any number of editorial decisions. Do we actually want to present this information or not? It's what I refer to colloquially as, why are you reading this now, with you spelled EWE, right? Why are the sheep being presented with this information? It's the same phenomenon that George Orwell highlighted in Animal Farm, right? The sheep are constantly used as the reinforcing mechanism. They're presented with new information. They then bleed it out, 2 legs, 4 legs good, 2 legs better, right? They bleed it out and effectively drown out the competing narratives. When something makes it forward to the point that it's being presented, it's already been on the back pages of the newspaper. It's slowly climbing its way forward. And if it's presented to you, it's happening for a reason. And so again, I think that's one of the things that's ultimately going on, is as a society, we are primed for a rebirth. The second component is to understand that taxes are not actually how a government finances itself. The government has the capacity to print money. This is what's referred to as modern monetary theory. It's not actually accurate if you're on a fixed exchange rate system like the gold standard, et cetera. Those are important checks against state power, but those checks against state power are artificial constraints that are created in order to get people to trust the government. There's a lot of reasons why that may be the right answer, but it's important to understand that that is a choice. What taxes really are mechanisms of redistribution and mechanisms of soaking up the expenditures that have been made by the government so that money doesn't circulate in perpetuity and create conditions of tremendous runaway inflation. So when we talk about taxes, really what we're talking about is, who do we take that surplus or that residual spending from? And the answer is always taxes should be paid out of surplus, right? Those who really truly need to get to that participation line should be paying very little in the way of taxes. Those who have far more and are far more successful should be paying more in taxes, in part because they benefit from the existing society and the societal framework that allows them to be wealthy without fear of loss of life or property. Once you reframe it in that context and you recognize that capitalism as a system rewards a compounding experience. If I earn 10% a year on my capital, that accumulates in a fashion that is far more rapid than the actual growth in population or the growth in incomes. Incomes typically will grow at about 4% a year. It's not unusual for people to experience capital returns over their lifetime that are more in the 8 to 12% range. Thomas Piketty talks about this as R versus G, right? The R being greater than G creates consolidation. I actually don't think you even need to go that far. You just need to recognize that the system as it is constructed under capitalism has an exponential growth feature to capital to it that is very different than the additive feature that you have for something like salary, right? Every year I get the salary grows a little bit, but last year's salary doesn't compound in the same way the capital does. Unless you tax the capital and the earnings off of that capital, that system naturally drives unbelievable inequality, and it actually perversely ends up in a system of aristocracy in which such extraordinary resources have accumulated to a few that they can, as we are actively experiencing in our lives, influence the very political framework in which they exist. And so they can structure tax breaks for themselves by lobbying Congress or by lobbying the executive branch. That is an inappropriate use of wealth because you're changing the rules to benefit you. Imagine if you played a game of Monopoly in which the winner got to, the winner or the leader at each round got to change a set of rules to make it even more favorable to him or her. That'd be a terrible game. Nobody would want to play it. And yet that's kind of the world that we're living in right now.
It's the Matthews effect. Right? It's cumulative advantage.
It is cumulative advantage, but the answer is, unfortunately, taxes are the solution to that. Because what taxes do is they take from those who have that surplus, they redistribute it to those who do not have that surplus and position them to play a game going forward.
Yeah, I still, as you were saying it, I was thinking, just sounds like he's talking about the problem. I don't know what the solution is, but
the solution is to increase the progressivity of the tax code. So yeah, I would encourage you, if you ever want to talk to somebody, if you ever want to talk to somebody super interesting, you should reach out to Ole Peters at the London Institute of Mathematics. His work, I think, is actually incredibly powerful. And so if I'm going to lock people into a couple of quotes, one is to remember John Maynard Keynes, right? Practical men who fancy themselves exempt are slaves to a defunct economist. We are all currently captured in the Milton Friedman framework of the world, in which somehow or another the system of capitalism is meritocratic, and those who receive the output from it are the most deserving. There's some truth to that, right? If I have unique skill and I bring it to a game, that is going to create advantages that allow me to accumulate capital that over the course of my life can compound and allow me to become extraordinarily wealthy. But my children did no such thing. Right, my children were genuinely just part of the Lucky Sperm Club, and as a result, they shouldn't receive any special exemption in any way, shape, or form. And the belief that they are unique and somehow or another through genetics, and I'm going to be passing that down, is simply reinstating the case for an aristocracy. Right, that there are those who are more equal than others in a country in which we believe everyone is created equal. So I think it's really important for people to understand that we are currently trapped in a false meritocratic system that is largely built on the back of the work of Milton Friedman, which is just wrong. The second thing that I would encourage people to do is to understand the difference between what's called an ergodic system and a non-ergodic system. And those are very big words, but I'll make it very straightforward. An ergodic system is one in which the time series average is the same as what's called the ensemble average. The easiest way to think about this is a pair of six-sided die. If you roll a pair of six-sided die 1,000 times, you're going to get almost the exact same distribution than 1,000 people rolling six-sided die one time. That is an ergodic system, one in which the ensemble across all 1,000 people is the same as the time series, 1,000 rolls. That's not how life works. That's how we started this conversation. There's a roughly 15 to 20 year window in which families can form, people can have houses, people can have relationships, people can have children. And so to think that an ergodic system defines one in which our time experience is incredibly limited is simply wrong. We are using the wrong economics to describe things. And so when we recognize that we're slaves to this prior economic system that is actually wrong in its implications and has led to all sorts of crazy band-aids that I'm sure you're familiar with. Behavioral finance and behavioral economics are simply two variants of those. You actually discover that the solution is really straightforward. You need to have a degree of redistribution that takes the extraordinary resources that exist in our society and provide them to new entrants into our system. We call those children. And provide them to those who have tried and failed. We call that personal bankruptcy or corporate bankruptcy. It encourages risk-taking. It encourages participation. And if you truly believe that we exist in a network rule economy in which information, which is a non-rivalrous good and can be spread in a nearly infinite fashion, and you're not actually a social Darwinist at heart who believes that somehow you're uniquely gifted by virtue of your genetic makeup, right? And instead recognize that the entire point of technology, like glasses, you're wearing glasses because you have inferior vision, right? Should I consign you to not be able to participate in society because you were born with a birth defect called myopia, right? No, right? We have this very simple tool that we introduced somewhere around the 13th or 14th century called eyeglasses that allow you to be a fully functioning member of our society. That makes us all richer. And that's really what we need to be thinking about with technology and capital investment, et cetera, by making it available to more people so that they have the ability to participate in our system. We're going to make everybody richer.
I'll give you, by the way, these are fake glasses. I have 20/20 vision. It's just designed to make myself look smarter. So is the accent. I'm actually from Long Island. But notwithstanding that, I was thinking to myself, look, he's definitely going to be in my book, even though he hates the word enough. He hates post-capitalist era. It doesn't matter. You're still going to be in the book. In addition to that, I was thinking, do I refer to him? I don't know what to refer to this man. He's a chameleon. Do I refer to him as a socialist, as a classic liberal, as a capitalist? Because he's like involved in some finance stuff as well. No, I'm just going to refer to him as a philosopher, which is the biggest compliment I can give you. Check out Michael's company at simplify.us or Simplify Us. Simplification is the key at the end of the day. And please go and subscribe to Michael's Substack. He really, really does give a fig. And you can follow this 3-part series that is going viral because it needs to go viral, because more people need to have this conversation. Michael, it's been, it's the best way for me to end this year talking to you. I've got my homework cut out for me, and my head hurts. So thanks for doing that, by the way.
Well, you're echoing a theme my wife often says. Not tonight, I have a headache. So I appreciate it very much, Joseph. Thank you for having me on. I do encourage people to check out what we do at Simplify. We are an alternative ETF provider. We grew out of some regulatory changes that allow the inclusion of hedge fund-like strategies in ETFs. Those are primarily focused around making investments safer and increasing the income associated with them. And then my Substack, Yes, I Give a Fig, as I mentioned, is basically, it's been described as Mike Green's attic or mental attic. It's the stuff I'm thinking about and trying to figure out where things go. So thank you again for having me, Joseph. I appreciate it. And I wish you the best in your pursuit of becoming sufficiently famous.
I will continue. It will be a lifelong pursuit, as long as it doesn't end up on my tombstone. And I'll tell you one person who also shares their belief that you are indeed a philosopher, as they say, not a poet, and he didn't know it, but this is a philosopher, is Chuck Norris.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
Happy New Year, everyone, and we will be back in 2026. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.